Okay, so today we're going to be looking at something that you probably haven't given much thought to.
Okay.
Cereal box conspiracies.
Uh-huh.
We've got this fascinating podcast episode, and
Yeah.
it claims that these cardboard containers, that hold our breakfast cereals are more than just, vessels for our Frosted Flakes or whatever.
Right.
Some folks believe they're packed with all sorts of secret messages, sneaky surveillance tech, even tools to control our minds.
Yeah.
Sounds wild.
It does.
I know.
Yeah.
But that's what we're here for today. We're going to unpack it all.
It's interesting how something so commonplace, you see it every day at the grocery store,
Right.
can become the center of these huge, elaborate theories.
Yeah.
It really says something about our human tendency to, seek patterns and meaning, even in the most unexpected places, like your cereal box.
Exactly. So let's start with this idea of subliminal influence. So the podcast episode argues that all the vibrant colors, the strategically placed mascots, all the intricate designs, they say it's not just clever marketing,
Right.
This is tools to tap into our subconscious and influence our behavior.
It's fascinating. That concept has been around forever.
Yeah.
Think about the 1950s.
Yeah.
Those subliminal advertising experiments. They would flash messages on movie screens for just a fraction of a second.
Yeah.
And they claim that influenced people to buy more popcorn or soda.
Right.
And though the effectiveness of those early attempts was always kind of debatable,
Yeah.
the idea that we can be influenced by messages that we're not consciously aware of, that persists today.
It makes you wonder.
Yeah.
So they're saying that Tony the Tiger is basically brainwashing us into craving Frosted Flakes. Is that what they're saying?
Well, not necessarily brainwashing, but the
No.
theory is that these design elements can exploit psychological vulnerabilities. Okay.
Think about color psychology, for example.
Okay.
Red and yellow, which we see all the time on cereal boxes,
Yeah.
are known to stimulate appetite
Mm-hmm.
and create this sense of urgency.
Yeah.
And that's not some fringe theory. This is pretty well established.
Right.
It's used across marketing and design, fast food chains.
Mm-hmm.
They use those colors for a reason.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, whether this crosses the line from persuasive marketing into manipulation,
Right.
I mean, that's a whole other debate.
That's what I find so interesting about all of this.
Yeah.
How much of our decision making is, truly conscious, and how much is just driven by, forces that we're not even aware of.
Exactly. And it goes beyond color too.
Yeah.
The placement of, elements on the box,
Uh-huh.
particularly the mascots, they think that plays a role.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about how often, especially as a kid, those characters make direct eye contact with you from the box?
It is. Now that you mention it, it's kind of creepy.
Yeah. They're staring into your soul,
Right into your soul.
But is that intentional, or are we just reading too much into it?
I mean, that's the tricky part.
Yeah.
Some theorists believe these designs are so meticulously crafted to exploit our natural instincts.
Yeah.
Our tendency to, follow gazes or respond to certain visual cues.
Yeah.
They argue it's a way to build trust,
Yeah.
create an emotional connection,
Right.
and ultimately influence purchasing decisions.
So they're hijacking our natural instincts to, sell us sugary cereal.
That's the claim.
Okay.
But you have to remember, there's a counter argument too.
Okay.
The human brain is wired to seek patterns and meaning.
Uh-huh.
We see faces in clouds,
Right.
animals in random shapes.
Yeah.
And this tendency, it's called pareidolia.
Okay.
And it could explain why we're so prone to finding hidden messages, hidden intentions,
Yeah.
even when they might not be there.
So maybe it's not that the cereal companies are being sneaky and manipulative. It's just our brains making connections that aren't really there.
That's possible.
Okay.
And also, we have to consider the role of, good old-fashioned marketing.
Right.
I mean, using vibrant colors, engaging characters,
Right.
catchy slogans. I mean, that's all standard practice to get attention, to appeal to consumers.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily equal subliminal manipulation.
Okay. So maybe we're not being brainwashed by our breakfast cereal.
Maybe not.
Okay. But this next theory this one's even more unsettling. So the source claims that some people believe cereal boxes are packed with hidden surveillance technology.
No.
We're talking microchips, cameras,
Ugh.
tracking devices, all tucked away in the cardboard. I mean, come on, isn't that a bit far-fetched?
It sounds like a sci-fi movie or something.
Yeah.
But you have to remember, we live in an age of increasing digital surveillance.
Right.
I mean, our phones, they track our locations. Our web browsing is monitored. Smart devices are constantly collecting data.
Right.
So, I mean, in that context, the idea that even cereal boxes could be watching us, I mean, it doesn't feel completely outlandish.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
But why would anyone go through the trouble of putting surveillance tech in a cereal box? Like, what's the end game here?
So according to this podcast episode, the goal is to create these detailed consumer profiles, gathering all sorts of information about our habits, preferences, even our political leanings. And then they could use that data for targeted advertising, which is already happening.
Right.
Or, you know, in a more sinister scenario, for like social manipulation or control.
Okay, now that is straight up, that's Black Mirror territory.
It is.
But seriously, is there any evidence to support these claims? Has anyone like actually found a hidden camera in their Cheerios box or something?
Well, that's where it gets kind of murky. There's no like credible evidence that cereal boxes are being used for mass surveillance. I think it's important to distinguish between, you know, plausible concerns about data privacy in our digital age and, you know, unfounded conspiracy theories.
Right. Just because we're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after us.
Right.
Okay. Let's move on to a theory that hits a little closer to home for me. The idea that cereal companies are deliberately misleading us about the nutritional value of their products.
This is a common concern, especially when it comes to like sugary cereals marketed to children.
Right.
Critics say that these companies, you know, they exploit children's vulnerability. They're creating this cycle of dependency on sugar and processed foods. And there's also the question of like misleading labeling. While nutritional information is required, some argue that it's presented in a way that kind of downplays the sugar content or overemphasizes certain health benefits.
You know, I've definitely fallen for that myself. You see whole grain or reduced sugar on the box and you think, hey, this is a healthy choice.
Right.
But then you look at the actual sugar content and you realize, oh, I've been duped.
It's a classic marketing tactic. Using like selective information and really appealing packaging to create a perception that might not align with reality.
Right.
That's why it's important to be, you know, informed consumers. And read those labels carefully. Don't just rely on the front of the box.
You're telling me I've learned my lesson. But some of these theories that go even further, they claim that certain ingredients are intentionally harmful.
Oh, wow.
Like they even link it to population control conspiracies.
Oh, my.
Now that's where I draw the line. It seems like such a leap from, you know, misleading marketing to intentionally harming people.
I agree. It's important to be critical of corporate practices. And we should demand transparency. But jumping to these extreme conclusions without evidence can be dangerous. It's important to distinguish between legitimate concerns about, you know, food safety and quality and these unfounded conspiracy theories that just like veer into fear-mongering.
Right. Okay, so we've covered subliminal messages, surveillance tech, nutritional deception. What's next on our cereal box conspiracy tour?
Well, how about we dive into the world of symbolism?
Okay.
Some believe those cartoon mascots aren't just friendly faces selling cereal. They're symbols of power, ideologies, or hidden agendas.
Wait, are we saying that Toucan Sam is secretly a Freemason?
Not quite. But the theory suggests that we should look beyond the surface and consider what these characters might like represent on a deeper level. Take, for example, like a tiger mascot. Some might interpret it as a symbol of, you know, corporate dominance, aggression, or even predatory marketing practices.
I never thought about it that way, but it makes you wonder, are those, you know, innocent smiles and playful gestures, are they actually a way to like subtly indoctrinate us?
That's the idea. Proponents of this theory, they argue that, you know, we're constantly bombarded with all these messages and not all of them are overt. They believe that these symbols can like bypass our critical thinking and influence our subconscious beliefs and behaviors.
So it's like propaganda, but hidden in plain sight.
You could say that. But again, you have to consider alternative interpretations. Our brains, they're hardwired to seek patterns and meaning. This tendency that we talked about, it could lead us to overanalyze and find symbolic significance where none exists.
So maybe we're just projecting our anxieties and suspicions onto these cartoon characters.
It's a possibility.
Okay.
It's also worth considering that using like archetypal symbols and characters, I mean, that's a common storytelling technique.
Right.
Not necessarily some sinister plot to manipulate us. Think about like how often animals are used in mythology or folklore.
Right.
To represent different traits and qualities. It's a way to tap into these like universal themes.
Yeah.
Create relatable characters.
Okay, so we need to be careful about jumping to conclusions.
We do.
But I have to admit, this whole conversation about cereal box conspiracies,
yeah,
it's making me look at my breakfast in a whole new light.
That's the beauty of these deep dives.
Yeah.
They challenge our assumptions.
Right.
They encourage us to question the narratives that we've been told.
Exactly. And speaking of questioning narratives,
yeah,
this podcast episode actually presents a counter-narrative to all of these conspiracy theories.
Okay.
Suggesting that some of this might be our minds playing tricks on us.
That's right. They highlight the concept of pareidolia, which we've talked about, as a possible explanation for why we see, hidden messages and intentions where none exist.
So maybe instead of blaming, sinister corporations for brainwashing us with subliminal messages, we should be like looking inward. And examining our own tendency to, find patterns, create meaning, even in random noise.
Exactly. It's a reminder that our perceptions are shaped by our own biases, experiences, and expectations.
So how do we separate the genuine concerns from just unfounded paranoia?
It's a great question, and one that we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into the psychology behind these beliefs and the potential consequences of, unchecked suspicion.
Sounds like a good place to pause for now.
It does.
Let's take a break and come back and unpack those ideas a little further.
Sounds good.
Okay.
What I find fascinating about all these theories is how they kind of highlight, our complicated relationship with food. We rely on it for survival, but we're also constantly bombarded with all these messages about what's safe and healthy and ethical to eat.
It's true. Food is so personal too.
Yeah.
It's tied to our cultural identities, our family traditions.
Absolutely.
So it's no wonder it becomes a breeding ground for anxieties and suspicions.
And I think those anxieties are often amplified by this sense of powerlessness.
Right.
We feel bombarded by, marketing messages, manipulated by these giant corporations that control our food supply.
Yeah.
These theories, they kind of offer a sense of control, a way to make sense of this complex and often overwhelming system.
We're looking for an explanation,
Yeah.
a reason why things are the way they are.
Yeah.
And sometimes a conspiracy theory, even if it's, outlandish, it can provide a semblance of order in a chaotic world.
Right. But those explanations, they can come at a cost. The podcast episode points out some real dangers that are associated with unchecked suspicion.
Okay.
And this isn't just related to cereal. This can apply to anything in our lives.
So what are some of those dangers?
Well, for one, it can erode trust in, legitimate institutions and experts. If we're constantly questioning everything and everyone, it becomes really difficult to tell the difference between genuine issues and manufactured controversies.
It creates a climate of cynicism where it's hard to know what or who to believe.
Exactly.
And we become so preoccupied with hidden agendas, ulterior motives, that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
And it can have this paralyzing effect if we believe that everything is, rigged, controlled by these shadowy forces. I mean, it can lead to a sense of helplessness, apathy. Why bother trying to change things if the outcome is already predetermined?
It's a slippery slope from healthy skepticism to outright paranoia.
It is.
And I can see how that could spill over from our cereal choices to other areas of our lives, like politics, healthcare, even personal relationships.
It's all interconnected.
Yeah.
When we adopt a worldview where everyone is suspect and everything is a potential threat, I mean, it creates a very isolating and stressful existence.
So how do we find that balance? How do we stay informed and critical without falling into the trap of paranoia and distrust?
That's the million-dollar question. It's not easy.
Yeah.
But I think it starts with being mindful of our own biases.
Okay.
Recognizing that we all have a tendency to see patterns, create narratives that confirm our existing beliefs.
Right.
Psychologists call it confirmation bias.
Right.
We're more likely to seek out and remember information that supports our preconceived notions and dismiss evidence that contradicts them.
So we need to be aware of our own filters.
Uh-huh.
The mental shortcuts we use to process information.
Right.
But how do we do that? It seems like such a subconscious process.
It is subconscious, but by consciously acknowledging that we all have biases, we can start to, challenge our own assumptions and be more open to alternative perspectives.
Okay.
It's also really important to cultivate a healthy sense of skepticism.
Okay.
And not just towards information that challenges our views.
Yeah.
But also towards information that confirms them.
So we need to be equally critical of information that aligns with our beliefs as we are of information that contradicts them.
You got it.
That's a tough one.
It is.
But I see how it can help avoid falling into echo chambers.
Right.
Filter bubbles.
Exactly.
Where we're only exposed to information that, reinforces what we already believe.
That's the danger. It's about actively seeking out diverse perspectives, challenging our own assumptions. And it's also crucial to be mindful of our sources of information.
Right.
Are we getting our news from reputable sources that are committed to journalistic integrity?
Yeah.
Fact-checking? Yeah. Or are we relying on sensationalized headlines, unverified claims circulating on social media?
That's so important.
It is.
Especially in today's media landscape, where misinformation can spread so quickly.
Absolutely. And even with reputable sources, we need to be critical thinkers, right? We can't just passively absorb information. We need to engage with it actively.
Yeah.
Question the assumptions, consider the motivations behind it, look for evidence to support the claims.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means being willing to change our minds when we're presented with new evidence. That can be a tough thing to do.
It can.
Especially when we've, invested a lot of time and energy in a particular belief system.
Right.
But it's essential for intellectual growth and for navigating a world where information is constantly evolving.
It's a process of continuous learning and adaptation.
Yeah.
We have to be open to new information and willing to adjust our understanding as needed.
Yeah.
It's not about being right or wrong. It's about seeking truth.
Right.
And making informed decisions based on, the best available evidence.
And I think that brings us back to these cereal box conspiracies.
Yeah.
While they might seem kind of trivial on the surface, they offer a valuable opportunity to practice those critical thinking skills.
You do.
They force us to, question our assumptions, examine our biases, consider different perspectives.
It's like a mental workout.
Yeah, exactly.
A way to strengthen our critical thinking muscles.
Right.
So we can be more discerning consumers of information.
Exactly.
Not just about breakfast cereal, but about everything.
Exactly. So how do we apply these critical thinking skills to those specific claims about cereal boxes?
Right.
How do we decipher what's plausible and what's likely just a figment of our overactive imaginations?
Well, let's take the example of subliminal messages.
Okay.
While the idea that we can be influenced by messages we're not consciously aware of is, intriguing.
Yeah.
There's limited scientific evidence to support the effectiveness of subliminal advertising.
Okay.
And even if it does work, the effects are likely to be, very subtle and short-lived.
So probably not worth losing sleep over the idea that Tony the Tiger is secretly controlling our minds.
Right. But what about those claims about hidden surveillance technology? I mean, that's a little harder to dismiss, given how much data is collected about us these days.
Yeah.
I understand that concern.
Yeah.
But again, we have to look for evidence. Has anyone actually found a microchip or camera in a cereal box?
Yeah.
And even if they did, what's the likelihood that it's being used for, mass surveillance?
Right.
It's a far more complex and expensive undertaking than some of these theories suggest.
It's like Occam's razor, right? Yeah. The simplest explanation is often the most likely. In this case, it's probably more plausible that those QR codes and loyalty programs, they're just marketing tools rather than elaborate surveillance schemes.
Exactly. And when it comes to those claims about, harmful ingredients or population control, I mean, we need to be even more cautious.
Right.
These are serious accusations. Yeah. They require without providing credible proof.
So it's about doing our own research, consulting reputable sources.
Right.
Not taking everything we read or hear at face value.
It is.
It's also about, being willing to acknowledge when a theory, however intriguing, just doesn't hold up under scrutiny.
Well put. And I think that's a key takeaway from all of this. Yeah. It's not about blindly accepting or rejecting everything we hear.
Right.
It's about engaging in critical thinking, questioning our assumptions, seeking evidence before we form our own conclusions.
Yeah. It's a process of continuous learning and discernment.
It is.
And it's so essential for navigating the complexities of the modern world.
Absolutely.
So as we continue to unpack these cereal box conspiracies, let's, keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Right.
And remember that the truth, like a good bowl of cereal, is often more nuanced than it first appears.
Now, that is a great analogy.
As we've been talking about these conspiracies, I've been thinking about how they relate to something the podcast episode mentioned about the dangers of unchecked suspicion.
Right.
They talk about how this constant state of suspicion,
yeah,
it can erode trust in institutions.
Yeah.
Which can have far-reaching consequences.
That's a crucial point. When we lose trust in institutions, it becomes difficult to function as a society.
Right.
It can lead to cynicism, apathy, a breakdown in communication.
It's like that saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. But the problem is, when we're constantly looking for threats, we might miss the real dangers or opportunities right in front of us.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Right.
Being aware of potential risks, but not letting fear and suspicion paralyze us.
The source also mentions that focusing on conspiracy theories can actually distract us from addressing real-world problems.
Yeah.
It's like we're so busy chasing shadows that we're ignoring the actual fire in front of us.
That's a powerful analogy, and it's something we see all the time, especially in, the age of social media. Yeah. It's so easy to get caught up in the latest, conspiracy theory outrage cycle.
Right.
But we need to be mindful of, where we're directing our attention and energy.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap?
Right.
How do we make sure we're focusing on the issues that truly matter?
It comes back to critical thinking.
Okay.
Questioning our sources of information. Considering different perspectives.
Yeah.
Being willing to challenge our own biases. Right. It's about being informed citizens, not just passive consumers of information.
It sounds like a lot of responsibility.
It is, but it's also empowering.
Yeah.
When we take ownership of our own beliefs and engage in critical thinking, we become active participants in shaping our world rather than just reacting to it.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
So as we continue to explore this world of cereal box conspiracies, let's keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Right.
And remember that there's a difference between, healthy skepticism and unfounded paranoia.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe this deep dive will inspire us to look at other everyday objects with a fresh perspective. Questioning the narratives we've been told. Yeah. Uncovering hidden meanings we might have missed.
Now that's a thought-provoking idea.
It is.
We'll have to explore that further in the last part of our deep dive. As we've been dissecting all these cereal box theories, it's got me thinking about how they reflect our broader anxieties about consumerism in general,
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
We're constantly bombarded with advertising messages,
right?
All competing for our attention, trying to get us to spend money.
Yeah.
So it's only natural to feel, some skepticism.
Right.
Maybe even a little distrust
towards,
the people who are trying to sell us something.
Yeah, especially when it comes to something as personal as food.
Exactly.
We rely on it for sustenance.
Right.
But we're also bombarded with, all this conflicting information about what's healthy and ethical and sustainable.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're told to be wary of processed foods, read labels carefully, support local farmers. It can be overwhelming.
It really can, yeah.
And that uncertainty, I think, can fuel those conspiracy theories.
It's like we're searching for a way to make sense of this really complex system.
You're right.
To feel like we have some control over what we consume.
And that's where those narratives, like about subliminal messages and hidden agendas, they come in, they offer this simple explanation,
right?
A way to kind of make sense of the chaos and feel like we're not just passive consumers being manipulated by, unseen forces.
So how do we navigate, this landscape?
Right.
How do we become more informed and discerning consumers without, falling prey to paranoia?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's a constant challenge, really.
Right.
But I think it starts with, recognizing that there's no easy answer. No, one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
We need to develop, a critical lens, a way to evaluate information, make decisions that align with our own, values and priorities.
So it's not about, blindly trusting or distrusting, everything.
Right.
It's about finding that balance between healthy skepticism and open-mindedness.
Exactly. Being willing to question both the narratives that, confirm our beliefs and the ones that challenge them.
So, what are some practical steps that we can take to become, more discerning consumers?
Well, one, important step is to just educate ourselves.
Okay.
I mean, the more we understand about how food is produced and processed and marketed, the better equipped we'll be to make informed choices.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power.
It really is. And it doesn't have to be, overwhelming.
Right.
Start by learning about the ingredients that you see most often on food labels. Research different farming practices.
Okay.
Pay attention to, food documentaries, investigative reports, things like that.
And it's not just about the food itself, but the companies behind it too, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
We can look into their practices, their values, their track records.
Yeah, I mean, you can support businesses that align with your own ethical and environmental concerns.
That's a good point. We have more power than we think.
We do?
To shape the food system, even just through our everyday choices.
I think so.
Even small decisions like choosing organic produce or buying from local farmers, that can really make a difference.
I agree.
It's about being mindful consumers, not just passive participants.
Right.
In a system that often feels completely out of our control.
Exactly. And that mindfulness can extend beyond just, the grocery store.
Right.
We can be more critical of advertising messages, question the narratives that we're being sold.
Right.
Challenge the status quo.
It's about taking ownership of our consumption habits and making choices that align with our values.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think that's, one of the things that these cereal box conspiracies can teach us.
Yeah.
They kind of remind us to be critical thinkers, to question the narratives that we're presented with, and to take, an active role in shaping the world around us.
So while we might not need to worry about, subliminal messages or hidden cameras in our cereal boxes.
Probably not.
There's still, I think, a valuable lesson to be learned here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that our perceptions, they're shaped by this really complex interplay of factors.
Yeah.
Our own biases, the information that we're exposed to, the narratives that we choose to believe.
And by becoming more aware of those factors, we can become, more discerning consumers of information.
Absolutely.
More empowered individuals.
Well said.
Yeah.
So, the next time you reach for a box of cereal, just take a moment to appreciate not just, the breakfast it provides, but also the opportunity it presents to reflect on our relationship with food, consumerism, and the power of critical thinking.
I think that's a great note to end on.
I agree.
So until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, keep your minds open to the possibility.
And maybe try a new cereal.
Yeah, you never know what hidden truths you might uncover.
Right, or at least you might discover a new favorite breakfast.